Marcus stepped into the kitchen with a nervous smile. The heat of the ovens, the smell of spices, and the loud voices hit him all at once. This wasn't like the small restaurants he had worked at before. This was one of the top restaurants in the city, the kind people waited months to get a table at. And now he was part of it. At least, that's what he hoped. He held his apron tightly in his hands, trying not to wrinkle it. His shoes were clean, his coat pressed, his name tag shining. But as he walked in, nobody greeted him. Nobody even looked at him. They were busy chopping, stirring, yelling, moving around like a machine. Every second mattered here, and it showed. Then he saw him chef, Roland, the head of the kitchen, a tall man with a sharp face, arms crossed. Eyes cold, he didn't smile, didn't nod, just stared. Marcus quickly walked up and introduced himself. "Morning, chef. I'm Marcus, the new line cook." Roland didn't shake his hand. He looked him up and down and said, "We'll see." That was it. No welcome, no tour, no handshake. Just "we'll see." Marcus swallowed his pride and nodded. He'd been through worse. He knew sometimes you had to earn your respect. He thought this was just part of the job. He had no idea what was coming. The first task they gave him wasn't cutting vegetables. It wasn't preparing sauces or checking meat. They gave him a mop. "Clean the floor around Station 3, someone said. Marcus looked confused but said nothing. He rolled up his sleeves and began mopping. A tie. He kept thinking, maybe this is just a test. Maybe they're watching how I work. So he mopped every corner with care, like it mattered. Then it was washing dishes, then taking out the trash, then scrubbing the back of the oven. All while the other line cooks were preparing beautiful dishes, slicing with speed, searing with flames, plating with perfection. Marcus didn't get to touch a knife that day, not even once, at lunch break. He sat alone on a small stool near the back door. He opened his lunchbox and quietly began eating. Some of the others sat nearby, laughing and talking, but nobody spoke. To him, he heard one of them whisper, "New guy's already sweating like a pig." Someone else laughed. Marcus didn't look up. He just kept eating, pretending not to hear, but it stung, every word. He didn't come here to be a cleaner or a joke. He came to cook, to grow, to make his daughter proud. He thought about calling. It quits that evening, just walking away. But then he remembered the look in his daughter's eyes when he left for work that morning. She had said, "You're going to be a big chef, Daddy." He had smiled and kissed her forehead. He couldn't let her down. Not like this. When dinner rush started, Roland shouted across the room, "New guy? Mop near the fryer. Someone spilled oil." Marcus dropped everything and rushed to clean it as he mopped near the hot oil. A small splash hit his wrist, burning him. He flinched, but didn't cry out. He just kept going. Nobody checked on him. Nobody said a word. He was invisible till they needed him to clean something again later that night. While walking past the prep table, Marcus accidentally bumped into another chef. Just a soft touch, barely noticeable, but the chef turned and shouted, "Watch it." Roland heard the shout and stormed over. "What's the problem now?" he asked, annoyed. The chef pointed at Marcus. "He's clumsy. Bumped me while I was holding a knife." Roland looked at Marcus like he was dirt. "I hope you're better at mopping than you are at walking," he said loudly. A few chefs laughed, others looked away. Marcus just stood there, silent. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He just nodded and went back to work. That night, as the kitchen quieted down and people started leaving, Marcus stayed behind. He cleaned every counter, wiped every shelf, and made sure everything was spotless. He didn't do it because they told him to. He did it because he wanted to prove something to himself, to them, to everyone. Even if they didn't see it yet, he knew his worth. He just needed time to show it. As he left the kitchen that night, the sky was dark and the streets were quiet. Marcus walked to the bus stop with sore feet and burned hands. But his back was straight. He had survived his first day, barely, but he had, and tomorrow, he'd be back. Because deep inside, he believed something they didn't, that one day they would remember his name, not as the cleaner, not as the joke, but as Chef Marcus, the one they never saw coming. The second morning came with cold rain and heavy clouds. Marcus stood outside the restaurant's back door, waiting for someone to open it. His uniform was still damp from being washed overnight, but he was early again, just like the day before. Before most of the others even arrived, before the shouting started, before the insults returned. When someone finally unlocked the door, they didn't even look at him. Just pulled it open and walked past him like he wasn't there. Inside, the kitchen was still quiet. The lights buzzed softly. The burners were still off. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped in. He went straight to work without being told, wiping counters, checking supplies, restocking the fridge. If he wasn't going to be allowed to cook, he'd still earn his place another way. When the other chefs began to trickle in, one of them noticed the prep station already cleaned. He looked around and saw Marcus organizing spice jars. He narrowed his eyes, but said nothing. They weren't used to seeing someone like Marcus take initiative. Most new hires kept their heads down and waited for orders. But Marcus was different, quiet. Yes, but not lazy, not weak. Roland arrived with a loud push of the door. He walked through the kitchen like a king inspecting his castle. When he saw Marcus working near his station, his lips curled slightly. "You're early," he said, with no warmth in his voice. Marcus simply nodded. "Yes, chef." Roland walked closer, picked up a knife, and stared at it as if thinking hard. Then, without warning, he tossed a plastic container onto the counter near Marcus. "These carrots," he said, "and don't screw it up." It was the first time Marcus had been given a knife since he started. He blinked for a moment, unsure if it was a trap or a test. Then he washed his hands, took the knife, and began cutting. His hands were steady, movements clean. Years of training in small kitchens taught him precision and speed. In minutes, the carrots were diced perfectly, lined up like little orange jewels. Roland passed by again, glanced down, and gave a short grunt. "Not terrible," he said, loud enough for others to hear. But someone did hear, didn't like it. A younger sous chef named Peter stepped over and looked at Marcus's work. He said nothing, but his eyes rolled, and he whispered something to the chef next to him. They both laughed under their breath. Marcus didn't react. He was used to that sound, now muffled laughter, side comments. It had followed him his whole life. And still, he kept going. Later that day, during the prep for lunch service, something strange happened. Roland handed Marcus a recipe card, an actual dish from the menu. It was a beet and goat cheese salad, simple but beautifully plated. Marcus read the card twice, just to be sure. Roland said, "Make it, plate it, let's see if you know how to follow instructions," and then walked away. Marcus worked fast but carefully. He peeled and roasted the beets, crumbled the cheese, added microgreens, and arranged everything, just like the photo on the wall. When he was done, he stepped back and waited. Roland returned, looked at the plate, and said nothing. Then he picked up a spoon, tasted the dressing, and looked directly at Marcus. Still no words, just silence. He walked away again, leaving the plate untouched on the side. No insult, no praise, just cold distance. But that plate didn't stay ignored for long. A server passing through saw it and picked it up, thinking it was ready for table 5 minutes later. A guest at the table asked for the chef who made it. She was an older woman, smiling and wiping beet juice from the side of her lip. "This was delightful," she said. "Tell the chef thank you." The server returned and told Roland what the guest said. Roland's jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked toward Marcus's butt still. He said nothing that night after service ended and the kitchen began to quiet. Marcus stayed again. He cleaned, as always. his hands raw from scrubbing pans and wiping counters. And as he dumped out the trash, he heard a voice behind him. You know he's never going to admit it, right? It was the old dishwasher, Elijah, leaning on his mop handle. But that salad? Best one we sent out all day. Marcus gave a tired smile. Not proud, not coquettious, thankful. It was the first real thing anyone had said to him since he arrived. Elijah pointed to the fridge. Tomorrow, Roland will try to test you again. Then he smiled. Don't let him break you, kid. Marcus nodded and finished his last task for the night. As he stepped outside into the now clearing rain, he looked up at the sky. Clouds were parting. Moonlight breaking through. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to shift. Not with loud moments or big speeches, but with quiet victories won. Diced carrot, one perfect salad, one silent nod at a time, and somewhere deep inside, Roland knew it too. The new guy wasn't going anywhere. The kitchen felt different that morning. The energy was tight, sharp, like something unspoken was hanging in the air. Marcus felt it the moment he walked in. Chefs weren't laughing like usual. Voices were lower, movements quicker. Even the sound of knives on cutting boards seemed faster, more aggressive. Roland didn't greet anyone. He stormed in with a clipboard in hand and eyes that scanned the room like a hunter. No smile, no sarcasm today, just silence and tension. Everyone stood a little straighter, worked a little faster. Something was coming, and they all knew it. Marcus quietly moved to his corner, ready to take on whatever they gave him. He had learned to expect very little and prepare for everything. He began slicing lemons, organizing herbs, and checking the prep list. But something felt off, he noticed. The sauces weren't where they usually were. And some containers were unlabeled out for a kitchen that ran like a machine. Then Peter walked past, nudged Marcus slightly with his elbow, and gave a smirk. Big day, huh? He whispered and walked off without another word at exactly 11. Roland clapped his hands loud enough to make someone drop a spoon. Team, I want everyone's attention, he said, his voice firm. We've got a very important guest. Coming in today, food critic from the Gazette. Gasps and nervous laughter followed. The Gazette was the city's biggest culinary magazine. One good review could change everything. One bad one could destroy a reputation overnight, Roland continued. We'll be serving the full menu. Everything must be perfect. He paused, then looked directly at Marcus. And Marcus here will be making our signature red wine reduction. Whispers filled the room. Someone coughed. Someone else looked away. Marcus's hands suddenly felt cold. That sauce was not just any sauce. It was used in one of their top dishes, seared duck with charred fig glaze. It had to be perfect. A single mistake would ruin the entire plate. And Roland knew it. Marcus nodded. Yes, chef. Without blinking, inside, his heart pounded like a drum. He had never made this sauce before in this kitchen, but he had studied it. Watched others make it, memorized the steps. He went to the station, took out the ingredients, and began his work. Red wine, shallots, rosemary, garlic, butter. A dash of sugar. The flame was just right. The timing perfect. He stirred and simmered, focused like nothing else mattered. Roland passed by, glanced at the sauce, and walked on without a word. That was the only sign Marcus got. After a few minutes, the sauce was ready, deep and glossy, with just the right consistency. He set it aside carefully and went to help plate. A salad. What he didn't notice was Peter standing nearby, eyeing the sauce with narrowed eyes. Moments later, Roland shouted from across the kitchen, Marcus, what the hell is this? Everyone froze, heads turning. Marcus rushed over and saw the sauce. Now boiling with a strange smell, he sniffed it. Too bitter, too spicy. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Roland was furious, his face red, his voice rising. You ruined it. You completely ruined it, he shouted, He held up the saucepan like it was a piece of trash. "You call this a reduction? This tastes like acid." Marcus stood stunned, looking at the pan. "I didn't make it like that," he said, his voice barely audible. Roland cut him off. "Are you saying I'm lying?" Marcus shook his head quickly. "No, chef. I mean, it didn't taste like that before." Peter coughed behind him, pretending to cover a laugh. Roland slammed the pan onto the counter. "Out of the kitchen, now," he barked. Marcus froze, eyes wide. Was he being fired? Was this it? But then Elijah stepped forward. "Chef," he said quietly, "may I speak?" Roland rolled his eyes. "Make it quick." Elijah stepped between them and said calmly, "I saw Peter near the stove just before the sauce boiled over." Peter's face turned pale. Roland turned slowly toward him. "Is that true?" he asked coldly. Peter stammered, "I was just checking the heat, that's all." Roland's eyes narrowed. He didn't shout. Now he was quiet. And that was worse. He turned to Marcus and said, "Make another batch." Then to Peter, "Step aside, you're off sauce duty." Peter clenched his jaw and walked away, muttering something under his breath. But nobody defended him. Not this time. Marcus remade the sauce, this time with Roland watching. Every step was perfect, every stir steady when it was done. Roland tasted it without a word. Then he nodded slightly and passed the sauce to the line cook. The dish went out seconds later, a plate of duck with a rich, glossy sauce and one quiet name behind it, Marcus. The critic never knew what had happened in the kitchen, but later that evening she called it the most balanced sauce she'd ever tasted. The review came days later, 5 stars, glowing praise, but back in the kitchen, Marcus didn't smile. He just kept working. He knew that being good wasn't enough. He had to be excellent every day, every shift, without a single mistake. Because in places like this, someone was always waiting for him to fail. But not today. Today, he had survived their trap, and the head chef had noticed, even if he'd never say it out loud. Marcus was no longer just the new guy. He was becoming someone they'd have to reckon with. That night, Marcus didn't go straight home. Instead, he walked the long way. Past the glowing signs and quiet streets, the city buzzed in the distance, but his mind was far from it. He kept hearing Roland's voice. "You ruined it," even though he had proved it wasn't his fault, even though the critic had praised the sauce. The sting of that moment stayed with him. He replayed the scene in his head over and over. The smell of the ruined pan, the anger in Roland's eyes, Peter's smirk, the silence of the kitchen. Even when he had been proven right, there had been no apology. Just another order, another shift, like nothing ever happened. When he finally reached his apartment, it was almost midnight. He opened the door slowly, not wanting to wake anyone. But his daughter was still up, waiting with a blanket wrapped around her. "Did you cook today?" she asked with a sleepy smile. Marcus sat beside her on the couch, smiled softly, and said, "Yes, baby, I did." She leaned on his shoulder and whispered, "You're the best chef in the world." That moment reminded him why he was still standing, why he hadn't quit, why he couldn't quit. The next day, he arrived even earlier. The sky was still dark, but he was already inside, cleaning and prepping before anyone else. This time, he wasn't trying to prove anything to Roland. He was doing it for himself. He wanted to be proud of his work, even if no one else was. Elijah walked in while Marcus was slicing onions. He leaned against the sink and said, "You've got grit, kid." Marcus chuckled softly, not sure it's grit or just being too stubborn. Elijah shook his head. "That kitchen was rotten long before you came." Roland used to be good, sharp, fair, maybe even kind, but years of pride and fear turned him cold. Now he tests people just to see if they'll break. Marcus nodded. I noticed Elijah lowered his voice. You didn't break, and that scared him. Before Marcus could reply, the kitchen door swung open and Roland walked in. He didn't speak, just stared at Marcus, working at the prep table. Then he walked past him without a word. But for the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful, maybe even unsure. Lunch service went smoothly that day. Marcus was assigned more real tasks, grilling, garnishing, even plating. The team noticed the shift. Whispers passed quietly between them. Some nodded with respect, others stayed distant. Peter avoided eye contact altogether. Later that afternoon, while Marcus was cleaning the fridge, he heard shouting near the pantry. He peeked around the corner and saw Roland arguing with someone in a suit, probably a manager. Words like costs, reputation, and replacement floated in the air. Marcus didn't mean to listen, but one line stuck in his head. You keep burning out new hires, Roland, and it's affecting the entire team. The suit left, and Roland stood alone in the hallway, fists clenched, chest rising fast. He turned and saw Marcus watching. For a second, their eyes locked. No anger, no words, just silence. Then Roland turned away and walked back into the kitchen. That night, Marcus didn't feel tired. It stayed late again, but this time, not because he had to. He wanted to. He stayed to sharpen every knife, organize the spices, polish the counters. He wanted the place to feel like it mattered, because even if the others didn't say it, he was slowly becoming a part of it. As he finished the last of the dishes, he found a folded towel left on his station. Inside was a small note, handwritten in rough ink. Not bad for a line cook. No name, no signature, but Marcus knew who it was from. He held the note for a long moment, then tucked it into his pocket. He walked out into the night with a strange feeling in his chest. Not happiness exactly, something quieter, deeper, maybe pride, maybe peace. He still wasn't accepted by everyone, and Roland still hadn't said a kind word, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone in that kitchen anymore. He felt like he was finally being seen, not as the black guy, not as the outsider, but as a chef. One shift, one dish, one silent victory at a time. He was earning his place, not by shouting louder, but by standing taller. And no one, not even Roland, could take that away now. The kitchen buzzed louder than usual that morning. There was talk of a private event, some celebrity booking the upstairs dining room for dinner. Everyone moved faster, cleaned sharper, spoke less. It was the kind of day where even small mistakes could cost someone their job. Marcus walked in on time. Already suited up, already focused. He had learned how to read the air by now, and today, the pressure was thick. Roland stood at the whiteboard with the menu for the evening. Special editions, extra courses, tighter timing. He assigned each task quickly, pointing with a marker like a general in battle. When he reached Marcus, he paused for a second. Then, with no expression, he said, "You're on mains." Every head in the room turned. It was the first time Marcus was trusted with full plates. Not sauces, not garnish, surreal dishes for real guests. Peter made a sound with his throat. Something between a laugh and a grunt. But Roland ignored it. Marcus kept his eyes on the board and nodded. "Yes, chef," he said calmly, but inside, his chest thumped hard. This wasn't just a task, it was a test, and everyone knew it. He spent the entire day checking everything twice. From the quality of the duck to the thickness of the glaze, he cleaned his station, sharpened his knives, and lined up every ingredient perfectly. He didn't talk, didn't joke, didn't stop. And when dinner service began, Marcus moved like clockwork. One order, then two, then five. He plated quickly, but never rushed. Roland walked past a few times, but said nothing, not even a grunt this time. That silence meant more than words. Then came the special order, Table 7 VIP request. Filet mignon, medium rare. With the house just in truffle mash, it had to be perfect. Marcus prepared it. With care, searing the meat until golden on each side, basting with butter, garlic, rosemary. He timed the mash to be hot and smooth. Shaped it just right on the plate, added a final touch of greens, and handed it to the server. But 10 minutes later, the server came back holding the plate. "The guest says this isn't medium rare," she said quickly. Marcus blinked, confused. He had checked it, rested it, cut it to be sure. It was medium rare. He looked at the plate and saw the cut dry. Overcooked, almost gray inside. It wasn't the same meat he had sent out before he could speak. Peter stepped up and said, "Chef, I saw Marcus holding it over the heat too long." Roland narrowed his eyes and looked at Marcus. Marcus shook his head. "No, chef, that's not the same." "Plate I made," Roland folded his arms. "Are you saying someone switched the plate?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at Peter, who avoided his gaze. Then he looked back at Roland and said softly, "I'm saying someone didn't want me to succeed." The kitchen went silent. Even the sound of frying pans stopped. For a moment, it was a dangerous thing to say, but Marcus had had enough. Roland didn't shout this time. He simply said, "Make it again." Marcus did, with steady hands, despite the burn in his chest. This time, Roland watched the entire process, every move, every second. When the new plate went out, the guest sent back a note. Perfect compliments to the chef, after the rush. When service slowed and the team cleaned up, Roland called everyone to the center of the kitchen. He stood beside Marcus and said in a loud voice, "Earlier tonight, someone tried to embarrass one of their own." He paused, scanning every face in the room. "That's not how my kitchen works." He turned slightly toward Marcus and said, "This man was tested unfairly, and he still delivered." Then, for the first time, Roland looked directly at Marcus. "And if anyone here has a problem with him, they can speak now." Nobody said a word. Even Peter stayed quiet, his face red, hands clenched. Roland nodded once. "Good," he said, and walked away. The room broke into quiet motion against chefs returning to their tasks. But something had changed. Marcus wasn't just surviving now, he was being respected. Elijah walked past, gave a small smile, and whispered, "About time." Marcus didn't smile back, but his shoulders relaxed just a little. That night, as he cleaned his knives and hung up his apron, he found another note folded on his station. This time, it was one word, underlined twice, earned. He stood there for a long moment, not thinking about Roland or Peter or anyone else, just thinking about the long path that had brought him here. Every step, every burn, every insult, it had all led to this moment. And he wasn't done yet. Not even close. The next few days in the kitchen felt different. Chefs who once ignored Marcus now nodded as he passed. They asked him questions, even small things like, "You got extra time," or "How'd you cook that duck so evenly?" And slowly, Marcus noticed the way people were looking at him had changed. There wasn't pity or doubt anymore. There was respect, quiet but real. Roland didn't say much. But he had stopped giving Marcus the lowest tasks. Instead, he let him run part of the line on his own. It wasn't spoken out loud, but Marcus could feel it. He had stepped into the spotlight. And some didn't like that. Peter grew colder each day. He barely spoke unless forced to. He stayed away from Marcus and snapped at others more than usual, but no one was laughing at his jokes anymore, and that made him bitter. He had tried to ruin Marcus twice. Now the kitchen was watching, and so was Roland. One afternoon, while prepping for a corporate lunch, Marcus noticed something strange. A tray of lamb was left out on the counter uncooked and already warm. He checked the temperature, and it was on the edge of being unsafe. He brought it to Roland. "Chef, this tray's been out too long. Roland frowned and said, "Who was in charge of that?" Peter turned around quickly. "It was fine 10 minutes ago." Marcus didn't argue. He just stepped back. Roland inspected it, smelled it, then threw it out without a word. He gave Peter a long look, but said nothing. Later that day, the replacement. Trey went missing too. By now, Marcus knew what was happening. It wasn't about cooking anymore. It was pride, fear. Jealousy, someone trying to push him until he broke. But Marcus wasn't that easy to break. He'd been through harder kitchens, tougher streets, and more dangerous nights than any of them could imagine. He didn't have the luxury to fall apart. Not when his daughter was counting on him. Not when this job was his only shot to build something better. That night, after everyone left, Marcus stayed behind again. As he scrubbed the steel counters, Elijah stepped in with a mug of tea in his hand. Peter slipping. Elijah said softly, "Everyone sees it, even Roland." Marcus looked up, wiping his hands. "I'm not here to get anyone fired," he replied. Elijah smiled, "You won't need to." He took a slow sip of tea, then added, "When someone's full of poison, they eventually drink their own." The next day brought a surprise. The restaurant owner, a woman named Ms. Jenkins, visited the kitchen during service. She wore a dark suit and heels, but moved like she had once been a chef herself. She greeted Roland first, then turned to Marcus. "You're Marcus, right?" She asked with a calm smile. He nodded, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." She glanced at his station, inspected his tools, and then said, "I've heard good things about your work. Keep it up." Then she turned to the whole team and said, "We need leaders in this kitchen." Her voice was clear, sharp, and direct. The ones who lift others up, not tear them down. No one spoke, but everyone heard the message, even Peter, who stood silently in the back. Roland didn't say a word during the visit, but as Ms. Jenkins left, she gave him a look firm and knowing. Something was shifting, and everyone could feel it. That evening, Roland called Marcus into the back office. It was the first time Marcus had been asked into the chef's private space. The walls were lined with awards, old photos, handwritten menus. Roland sat at the desk, stared at the cluttered surface. Then finally looked up. "You've done well," he said, voice low. Marcus said nothing, waiting for what came next. "I've been hard on you." Roland added, "Some of that was the job. Some of it wasn't." Marcus blinked, unsure if this was an apology or something else. Roland leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're not like the others," he said. "You don't fold, you don't whine, you just work." There was a long silence between them. Then Roland added, "This kitchen's changing, whether I like it or not." Marcus finally spoke. "It should have changed a long time ago." Roland didn't argue. He just nodded slowly as Marcus stepped out of the office. He saw the kitchen through different eyes. It was no longer just a battlefield. It was becoming something else's space where he wasn't just surviving. He was becoming a name, a voice, a force, and deep down, Roland knew it too. The man he once tried to humiliate had become someone he could no longer ignore. The next morning, Marcus didn't set an alarm. He woke up naturally, before the sun. Feeling calm for the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest was gone. He didn't have to prepare himself for humiliation or fight to earn space at the counter. He just had to show up and cook, and that, finally, was enough as he walked into the kitchen. Something had changed. People smiled, said good morning, and made space for him on the line, the same line he had once been pushed away from. Now he stood at the center of it, not because someone allowed it, but because he had earned it. The knives were sharp, the pans were hot, but the tension that once filled the room had melted. There was laughter, real laughter, not the kind that came with whispers behind someone's back. The kitchen felt alive in a new way, tighter, cleaner, more human. And it wasn't because Roland was gone. It was because Marcus had stayed. Later that day, Ms. Jenkins returned. She didn't come with cameras this time, just a clipboard and a quiet smile. She walked through the kitchen, watching how the team moved. She noticed something most owners never saw: trust. People were working together, not competing to survive. She stopped near Marcus's station and said, "The energy's different now." Marcus nodded. "It feels right." She studied him for a moment, then said, "I'd like you to help train our next wave of chefs." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am," that evening. After the last plate was served and the kitchen began to slow down, Marcus found a folded paper on his station. No name on it, no handwriting he recognized, just one sentence written in black ink. "You made this kitchen better." He held it for a long time. Not needing to know who left it, the message said everything he had worked for, everything he had fought through when he finally walked out into the night air. The city lights blinked around him like stars. He looked up at the sky, thought of his daughter asleep at home, thought of his first day in this place to mop, the jokes, the burns on his wrist, then thought of now, and smiled. He had walked through fire, not to burn others, but to prove he couldn't be destroyed. He hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, he just stood tall, shift after shift, until the world around him had no choice but to change. And now, when people said his name in that kitchen, they didn't whisper it. They said it with respect. Marcus, the chef who didn't give up, the man who turned silence into strength, and the one who reminded everyone real power doesn't come from fear. It comes from never backing down when it matters most. The restaurant was fully booked that evening. Every table was filled, every seat taken. The noise from the dining hall echoed like soft thunder through the kitchen walls. It was the kind of night where everything had to run perfectly, no mistakes. No delays, no excuses. Roland stood at the head of the kitchen, giving out final checks. Fire mains for table 12, he shouted, "Pick up for 9. Let's go. Move." The team was moving fast but smooth. Even the new interns followed. Orders without missing a beat, and in the center of it all, working the line with calm, steady hands, was Marcus. He wasn't the new guy anymore. He was the one chefs asked for help, the one they trusted when the pressure was highest. He plated dish after dish with speed and precision. He didn't need to shout or show off. He let the food speak for him. But as the night went on, something unusual happened. Ms. Jenkins, the restaurant owner, returned this time with reporters and photographers. She was hosting a press event in the front dining room. The media was doing a feature story on the restaurant's rise in the city rankings. Cameras flashed, waiters rushed back and forth, and suddenly the quiet tension in the kitchen turned sharp again. Ms. Jenkins stepped into the kitchen, smiling. "This is where the real magic happens," she said to the cameras. Roland stepped forward to greet her, ready to take the credit, but before he could speak, Ms. Jenkins turned toward Marcus. She waved him over and said, "This is the man I want you to meet." Marcus froze for a second, then slowly walked forward, wiping his hands on a towel. One of the reporters asked, "You're the new chef?" Marcus smiled politely. "One of them? Yes." Ms. Jenkins put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Not just one of them, he's the reason this kitchen didn't fall apart." There was a moment of silence. Roland's face tightened, his jaw clenched. Another reporter asked, "Weren't you the head chef here?" Roland replied flatly, "I am." Ms. Jenkins spoke quickly, her voice sharper now. "Not anymore," she said, looking directly at him. The whole kitchen went still. Even the sizzling pans seemed to go silent. "You've been warned," she continued, "about the complaints, the sabotage, the toxic leadership." Her voice carried through the kitchen like a knife cutting through butter. This restaurant grew because people like Marcus refused to quit. Even when they were treated unfairly, she stepped back and added, And I won't let your ego hold this place back any longer." Then she turned to the team, lifted her voice, and said, "Effective immediately, Chef Roland is relieved of his duties." Gasps spread across the kitchen. Peter dropped a spoon. One of the line cooks whispered, "No way." Roland didn't speak, didn't argue. He stood frozen, humiliated. The same way he had once tried to humiliate Marcus. Ms. Jenkins handed a sealed envelope to Roland, then turned to Marcus. "I want you to help lead this team moving forward," she said. Marcus blinked, stunned. He had never imagined this. Not here, not like this. But he didn't hesitate. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Roland turned and walked out of the kitchen without saying a word. No applause followed him. No one stopped him. He had walked over to many people for too long, and now he was alone. As the door closed behind him, the kitchen seemed to breathe. Again, someone whispered, "Finally." Marcus didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. He returned to his station, picked up his knife, and went right back to work, because that's who he was. A chef not just in title, but in heart. He had fought for his place with dignity, not revenge. And now, he had earned something far greater than a position. He had earned their respect.